Welcome, fellow Lions fans. This is an exciting time for us as we head into this season with unprecedented hype. Many are predicting the Lions to win the Super Bowl. Sportsbooks have taken the second most bets for the Lions to win the Super Bowl, just behind the Chiefs. Many Lions are getting national TV commercials, including Dan Campbell, who's selling boneless wings at Applebee's. Not sure he's the right guy to be selling boneless wings, aka chicken nuggies, as he likes to eat kneecaps and haul around his testicles in a wheelbarrow, but it's all good in Lions land right now. I'm Dr. Jimmy Liao, University of Michigan Medical School grad, board certified in family medicine. This is the medical edition of the Detroit Lions podcast. Today I'm going to discuss injury news over the past couple weeks, what the 53-man cutdown taught us, and an update on my top 10 offseason player watch list, as well as a preview of the Rams game. This preseason has been like a PG-13 horror movie. A lot of jump scares, but really nothing too terrifying overall. We had guys like Gibbs with a hamstring, Arnold with his pec, Sewell with his ankle, but none of those guys ended up with anything serious. And after saying my last rites to our 6th-round pick, Christian Mahogany, he ended up being just fine as he's alive and well after a bout of mono. Let's start with Penei Sewell, who hurt himself before the Steelers preseason game on August the 21st. The initial report was a foot injury, but then subsequently reported as an ankle, described as a rolled ankle. So now that we know it's a rolled ankle, what does that mean? Most likely a rolled ankle is an inversion sprain of the ankle. That's when the sole of the foot points inward. If you step on a foot, if you step on a rock, it's more likely you're going to roll it in an inversion mechanism versus an eversion mechanism. Now, an inversion sprain causes a low ankle sprain, which is preferred over a high ankle sprain, which is caused by eversion. Now, it's interesting that an eversion injury can be caused by getting rolled up on. So subtle difference in wording there versus rolled ankle versus getting rolled up on. So a mild low ankle sprain is no concern going forward. It's pretty easy to tape it up and protect it, and you can play through it generally. For example, David Montgomery last year played through a low ankle sprain in the Packers Thanksgiving game and didn't miss any future games. And that's a running back who needs his ankle flexibility more than an offensive lineman. Another interesting thing that happened before the Steelers game involved a former Lion. That's Mohamed Ibrahim. He signed with the Vikings, but then was waived at the cutdown date, though. Remember last year, he had a right hip dislocation. It was reduced at the hospital without surgery, and he missed the rest of the season. This is an unusual, sort of scary injury. The long-term concern for Ibrahim is avascular necrosis, which is about a 5 to 10% chance of getting that, and it usually manifests within 5 years. He'll need serial MRIs to monitor that issue. It's a really good early sign, though, that he did sign with the Vikings, which suggests that he has no signs of avascular necrosis so far. Now let's get to the Steelers game. The big news out of that one was Broderick Martin. The video is very obscured, but it looked like he took a bad step, which could have caused a mild right hyperextension and bone bruise. And Dan Campbell, after the game, did confirm that it was a mild hyperextension. On the field, they did do an ACL test, which was a Lockman test, so he presumably passed that just fine. So overall, it did not look overly concerning. However, surprisingly a little bit at the cutdown day, he went on the IR designated to return list. The good news there is it's not something super serious like an ACL, otherwise he would not have been designated to return. But we don't know the severity, so maybe it was slightly more serious than just a mild hyperextension. Potentially there's some knee sprains going on, potentially cartilage damage, so hopefully his absence will be short-term. A player who did not play during the game was Jamarco Jones, who reportedly had some kind of injury during the week. Fortunately, Gio Manu and Colby Sorsdahl looked very solid during the game, especially impressed with Manu, who was billed as a project but has looked pretty good out there so far in preseason. Jamarco Jones has been returned to the practice squad currently. Craig Reynolds also did not play, but Dan Campbell says he's fine. James Houston did play, this time without his right knee brace. Remember, he missed the second preseason game. He got a sack from the left defensive edge position on an inside rush and mostly played on the left side again, which I found interesting. The one time he was on the right side, he did get a quarterback pressure, so we'll see how he plays going forward from the left or the right side during the regular season. Ifeatu Melifonwu did not play due to an unknown injury, although currently it's now reported as an ankle. I looked back at the second preseason game, and it looked like he hobbled a little bit after a kickoff coverage in the first quarter. Did not look like anything too serious. He continued playing without missing any snaps and finished playing the entire first half. So it didn't look like anything overly concerning, but it's something to keep an eye on going forward. A guy who had a concussion in this first game was Hendon Hooker. Unfortunately, he didn't look that great. Did not process the field very quickly, was taking too many sacks and still running too much, so a little bit disappointing from our third-round pick a couple years ago. Hopefully he can improve going forward. Now let's get to some post-game news. One of the big news was on August the 25th, DJ Reader was activated off the PUP list that allows him to start practicing or doing individual drills. Campbell had mentioned earlier that they would start him on individual drills first. This was pretty big news to me. I had expected him to stay on PUP into the regular season for a variety of reasons. I'm really worried about his recovery from that right quad tendon tear, which was only about 9 months ago. There's a durability concern going forward. He also had a knee scope in June, which is often a sign of cartilage damage. That likely affected his rehab. I thought they might keep him on PUP into the regular season, both for roster management reasons, as it would free up a spot, as well as easing him into the season, hopefully to keep him ready for the end of the season and the playoffs. So we'll see how this season turns out. The fact that they activated him 2 weeks before the start of the regular season is a very good sign, though, for his rehab and recovery, as that must mean he's looking good and he's getting ready to play. So what's the outlook for Reader going forward? Well, Dan Campbell initially came out and basically ruled out week 1 and said that week 2 was the target. Although yesterday he said that there was hope that he might be able to play in week 1. I feel like it's a little bit unlikely he'll play in week 1 since he'll only have about 2 weeks of practice before the game. It seems like too big of a rush, and it's not worth taking the risk this early in the season. Interestingly, the Lions last year had a similar situation with a guy coming off a serious year-long injury. That's Emmanuel Mosley, who had an ACL, and like Reader, he had a knee scope during rehab, which delayed his return. Mosley was activated also late in preseason on August the 23rd and did not play until week 5. So, of course, every injury and player are going to be different, but you might want to expect a possibly similar timeline for Reader based on what we saw from Mosley last year. So I'd expect him to start the season somewhere around week 2 through 5. Now, as I said before, there's a philosophical debate about how much you want to play him in the regular season, because what matters for this team is January, not September. You don't want to be like the Eagles who started the year 10-1 and then fizzled off in the playoffs. You want to be the Chiefs who looked sort of mediocre during the year, but then looked fine and won the Super Bowl. On X, @SlimDST82 asked, you think the right quad tendon tear is related to the left quad tendon he tore in 2020? It's possible that it was a compensation injury. It's not a common injury to have, so to have two just due to random chance would be extremely unlikely. So a compensation issue or an anatomic issue or having weaker tendons compared to muscle strength, playing mechanics, something was going on that likely caused both quad tendons to tear. Now let's talk about some news at the 53-man cutdown and how it relates to injuries. 2 guys were placed on the designated to return IR list. Emmanuel Mosley with his pec tear was expected. The unexpected one was Broderick Martin, placed on it due to his knee injury, likely a hyperextension, but the fact that he was put on it suggests it's possible something unexpected showed up on MRI, like cartilage damage or a more serious knee ligament sprain. Hopefully it's nothing too serious for him. The one guy that we were expected to see on the designated to return list was John Kominski, but he ended up making the 53-man roster and then getting put on IR afterwards. James Houston made the 53-man roster, which I was very happy to see coming off his serious right ankle sprain and fibula fracture. Christian Mahogany was remained on the NFI list, which means he's out for the first 4 weeks of the season, but he can start practicing after that. Now let's talk about Christian Mahogany and his mono and what this means going forward. The mono was reported by Justin Rogers earlier this week. Mono is an extremely common infection. 90 to 95% of people have antibodies to this infection, which suggests that they contracted it at some point in their life. Most people probably got it as a child and never knew about it. Most times its symptoms are mild or even asymptomatic. In some cases, the symptoms can be more severe, though, which would cause them to go see a doctor, and they get tested for mono and get a diagnosis for that. So if an athlete was diagnosed with mono, the main concern is enlargement of the spleen, known as splenomegaly. That's found in about 50% of patients. The issue here is with the enlarged spleen, it increases the likelihood it could rupture. That's a rare issue that could happen, but it is life-threatening. So you want to avoid contact sports, and you even want to avoid heavy lifting, as that abdominal pressure potentially could rupture the spleen. Typically, at about 3 to 4 weeks, the risk of a splenic rupture is significantly reduced, so it's recommended to avoid sports, contact sports, or heavy lifting for about 3 to 4 weeks. Now, in rare cases, the splenomegaly can persist beyond 4 weeks, and with a contact sport like the NFL players, they would get an ultrasound to check for enlarged spleen to make sure they could return to sports. Now, presumably, since Mahogany has resumed strength training, that suggests that he got an ultrasound that looked fine, and any splenomegaly he might have had has resolved. So what's its outlook going forward? Unlikely to be any long-term issues for Mahogany. Again, 90 to 95% of us have gotten mono, and we're doing just fine. Now, about 10% of individuals report persistent fatigue that lasts for months, but this usually resolves over time, and some also experience some lingering sore joints. That could potentially affect his performance. But just something to note, fatigue and sore joints are vague symptoms that are impossible to measure, so those could be related to other factors and not necessarily related to mono. Mahogany has been on the NFI list since the start of camp and is remaining on the NFI into the season. That means he's not eligible to play the first 4 weeks of the season. The earliest he's able to come back is October the 13th versus the Cowboys, which is after a bye. From a physical standpoint, I think Mahogany probably could play by the Cowboys game, as he'll have had about 8 weeks of training before playing that game. But since he's a rookie who's missed a significant amount of practice, he's missed all of training camp, all of preseason, and he'll have missed the first 4 weeks of the season. It's his mental game that'll probably delay his return. Remember, he can't start practicing until after the first 4 weeks. So hopefully at some point, maybe in late October, we can see him take on a limited backup role at the offensive guard position. All right, now let's do an overall outlook on how things went in the preseason. Overall, we're very healthy. No ACLs. Only one possible Achilles. That was David Bada. Not sure if that was a full tear or a partial or what's going on there. Let's review the most significant injuries over the preseason. It's all backups that are out long term, so it really depends on if the starters are healthy ahead of them to see how much it matters in the regular season. Number 1 would be Emmanuel Mosley with his pec tear. He could have gotten a lot of playing time right out of the gate as our 4th or 5th cornerback. With cornerback injuries being so common, maybe even a starter at some point, who would have expected Khalil Dorsey or Kendall Vildor to be starting for us at the end of last year? But he might return at the end of the season, around Thanksgiving, hopefully, so he could still play a big part for us this year. The second guy would be John Kominski, who had an MCL tear with surgery, out for reportedly 5 or 6 months. He's currently on IR, but he could return to the team at some point. He was a very good player for us a couple years ago. Last year, though, not nearly as effective. But with a lot of question marks along the defensive line, Kominski still might be in play for significant playing time if he can return this year. Number 3 would be Connor Galvin. MCL tear with surgery, just like Kominski. Galvin was hurt in the first preseason game. It required surgery. Again, probably 5 or 6 months, like Kominski. He logged the most snaps of any offensive tackle during that preseason game, which could be interpreted as a sign that he was trending towards being the Lions' primary backup offensive tackle heading into the season. So this could be a big loss if Sewell or Decker go down. Fortunately, Sorsdahl and Manu have looked a lot better over the preseason. The fourth guy would be Antoine Green. He had a concussion and maybe more in that first preseason game. Brad Holmes said that he was about to take over the X-receiver spot, so he was going to be in line for a lot of playing time and a big role for this season. He's our 7th-round pick from 2023, so that would be a great reward from a 7th-round pick. Now, there was some confusion about whether he was waived with injury settlement or just put on IR. According to Jeff Risson, he's currently on IR without an injury settlement, so not sure if that possibly could change in the future. But if he stays on IR, he's out for the year. If there's some kind of injury settlement that's negotiated, he could return to us later in the season. Now, his issue was possibly more than a concussion, as he was released just 4 days after his injury, which is unusual. Potentially, he had something more serious than a concussion, maybe a neck injury, maybe a more serious concussion with complications. We don't know exactly the details there. Number 5 on my list would be Christian Mahogany. As I discussed earlier, hurts his development a lot, missing the entire camp. Hopefully, he can turn into a starting offensive guard down the line. But this year, with missing all of camp, maybe the best we can hope for is to be a good backup offensive guard. Number 6 would be Michael Badgley, who tore his hamstring and got surgery. This will depend on if Jake Bates is good this year or not. He's sort of up and down in the preseason. He's got a monster leg coming from the Michigan Panthers, who I have fond memories of. I still remember going to the Michigan Panthers game in the Silverdome when I was a kid. They won the first USFL championship, so I have a lot of memories, fond memories of the Panthers with Bobby Hebert, Anthony Carter, and those guys. So nice to see Jake Bates from a Panthers uniform now in a Lions uniform. Number 7, Broderick Martin, unexpectedly placed on IR with his right knee injury, unknown severity. Hopefully it's short-term. He's an important guy along the defensive line, second-year player, hoping he's going to take a step up this year. But unfortunately, this knee injury is a setback. Number 8 would be Ifeatu Melifonwu, starter for us down the year last year, played really well, made a lot of splash plays, but injured in preseason, ankle injury, unknown severity, doesn't sound like it's too serious, doesn't sound long-term. Apparently, he's in a backup role this year with Kirby Joseph and Brian Branch taking over as the starters. All right, those of you who have been watching my episodes know that I did a top 10 watch list a couple episodes ago before training camp started. These are guys who are coming off off-season injuries or off-season medical issues that we should keep an eye on. So let's do a rundown here of those guys. Number 1 was James Houston. Again, missed most of last year with his severe right high ankle sprain. Unfortunately, a bone bruise likely limited him this entire preseason. So it's really hard to make a good judgment on how he's doing. Fortunately, he did make the 53-man roster. So we'll get to see how things go over the rest of this year, hopefully. Number 2 is DJ Reader, coming off his right quad tendon tear in December of last year. Very good sign for his recovery that he got early activated off the PUP list 2 weeks before the season started. So really good sign for his rehab and recovery. So positive news with him. Number 3 was Levi Onwuzurike, coming off a L5-S1 lumbar fusion from 2022. Last year, he made a remarkable recovery to playing 13 games. This year, he's looking great, running with the first string and getting really nice reports from Dan Campbell. So great news there with Levi. Number 4 is Brian Branch, who was observed at the draft in April with a knee scooter with some kind of left foot or ankle surgery. We still don't know any details of the surgery, don't know how severe it was. He was limited early on in camp, but since then has not had any limitations. So positive news for him. Number 5 was Kirby Joseph, who hurt his hip last year in week 2 and ended up having off-season hip surgery. No setbacks in camp. He's had no limitations, so good news with him. Number 6, Taylor Decker, recovering from multiple off-season surgeries on his ankle and foot. He was a concern going into camp with these issues. He played through most of these issues last year, though, so no major concerns. But in camp, no setbacks, no reported problems, so he looks just fine for the regular season. Number 7 was Emmanuel Mosley coming off his right ACL tear. Well, the ACL was recovering well. Riston reported that he was looking great in camp, looking to make a really good comeback. Unfortunately, that pec tear sabotaged everything, and he's out for a few months most likely. His ACL, though, should be recovered by the time his pec is healed up. Number 8, Ennis Rakestraw, coming off a core muscle surgery. Now, there are some questions with him since he had not had any active game time since the surgery. So he's looked great in preseason in that first game, and he's looked good in camp too. So his athleticism looks good. He doesn't look like he has any issues following with that core muscle surgery. A lot of times that surgery is very effective, but occasionally it doesn't address the issue. So good news for Ennis going forward. Number 9 was Marcus Davenport, free agent defensive end from the Vikings, limited by ankle issues last year, including a left high ankle sprain in October, which ended his season. So far in camp, he's been first string, looking good. One of his main concerns, though, was his motivation and energy level. There were some rumors out of Minnesota last year that there were questions about that. So far, he's played the part and has looked really good, so hopefully that continues throughout this season. Number 10 was Kevin Zeitler, who had knee and ankle issues in the offseason, possibly had those issues last year as well. Unfortunately, there was a shoulder injury that's kept him out of practice for most of this preseason, so hard to say what's going on with that. Hard to say if his knee and ankle issues are concerning at all, but he's not on the injury report for this week, so it looks like he'll probably be fine, but inconclusive on him. All right, now let's get to the game preview. Exciting times. First game of the season. Let's get off to a good start. We got Stafford and the Rams coming in, looking to get revenge from the playoff loss last year. So let's break down the Lions and Rams Wednesday injury report. From the Lions standpoint, limited practice for Ifeatu Melifonwu. This is actually really good news. It suggests that the ankle issue is not serious or long-term, the fact that they listed him as a limited practice. DJ Reader was also a limited practice. This is expected. He's coming off his right quad tendon tear. I still don't expect him to play in week 1. I don't think that's a smart move. Hopefully they delay his return until later in the year, week 3, 4, 5 or so. I want him to take his time coming into the season. I don't want any setbacks with him. So we'll see how this goes going forward. No practice was Lawrence Strickland. He's an undrafted rookie cornerback from Ball State. One of the surprises to make the 53-man roster. He's a backup safety. He was unlikely to be active anyway as a backup safety with multiple guys ahead of him. So his injury is not going to be any big loss on game day. Now, the notable guys who are not listed is more interesting than the guys who were listed. Jahmyr Gibbs with his hamstring, Terry Arnold with his pec, Kevin Zeitler with his shoulder, Penei Sewell ankle, James Houston with his knee bone bruise, Ennis Rakestraw with an ankle, Dan Skipper with his possibly bilateral high ankles, Sam Laporta hamstring, Carlton Davis with his hamstring. All those guys were not on the report, so great news for all of them. Now, one guy who also was not on the report was Frank Ragnow, who's been a permanent fixture on the report for a long time now with his toe, as well as various other maladies that crop up throughout the year. So the fact that we did not see him on the first report of the season is nice. We'll see how long that lasts. All right, now let's talk about our opponents, the Rams. 5 guys on their report. Jonah Jackson, a full practice with a shoulder. Earlier in camp, he had a bruised scapula, which is a bit of an unusual injury, but sounds like he's ready to go for our game. Puka Nacua had a knee injury in camp, but he's a full practice on Wednesday. He had a knee bursitis from landing on it hard. I expect no issues with him. Rob Havenstein, offensive tackle, has an ankle issue with a limited practice. Now, his is going to be interesting to watch, as the other offensive tackle, Alaric Jackson, has been suspended for the first 2 games of the season. So both of their offensive tackles are potentially weakened here. So this will be interesting for the Lions going forward with their defensive ends to see if Josh Paschal, James Houston, Marcus Davenport can really step up and get some pressure on the quarterback with potentially a weakened offensive tackle position for the Rams. Darius Williams, defensive back, has a hamstring, limited practice for him. Kobe Durant, cornerback, hamstring with a limited practice. So we'll keep an eye on those going forward. A couple guys in the secondary, so we'll see how that affects the Rams if they can't play. That's it for today. Can't wait for Sunday night. Enjoy the game. Check out my articles on Lions Wire. Thanks to Jeff Risden for bringing me on there. Also follow me on Twitter at Jimmy Liao MD for any instant analysis during the week or during the game. Thanks for listening.